Hi, my name is Jack. I'm with the Economics Tutoring Center at Arizona State University, and today I'm going to show you a small country tariff example for an importing country to see how a tariff impacts an importing country and how that impacts producer and consumer surplus. So we're going to start with our pre-tariff price, our world price. And we know the country is going to be importing because the world price is below what our equilibrium price would be in the market, which means we have a higher quantity demanded than we have quantity supplied in the domestic market because the price is lower than our equilibrium price. So at this world price, we want to find where our quantity demand and our quantity supplied is. So we follow the supply line, where that intersects world price gives us our initial quantity supplied, and going to the demand curve, we find our initial quantity demanded. And with this price, we can find producer and consumer surplus before the tariff is imposed. We know our producer surplus is the area below the price and above the supply line, which will be this small triangle right here. That's our producer surplus. Consumer surplus is going to be the flip side of that. It's going to be the area above the price and below the demand line, which is going to be this much larger triangle, which it takes up this whole area. So we see before the tariff is imposed, consumer surplus is much larger than producer surplus because the world price is lower than the equilibrium price in the market. In the pre-tariff, at the pre-tariff price of the world price, the difference between your quantity demanded and quantity supplied is going to be the amount of goods that are imported, because domestic suppliers are only willing to supply this amount, but demand is much higher. So this area is the amount that's imported from other countries. So now we'll see what happens when we add a tariff and how that changes the market price and how that affects quantity demand and quantity supply. So a tariff essentially raises the market price to above what the world price was. So we'll draw a line right about here. This will be our price with a tariff. A tariff is a tax placed on foreign suppliers that makes it more expensive for them to export their good into the importing country. So we now have a price with a tariff that's higher than our initial world price. And this is going to change both quantity supplied and quantity demanded in the importing country's market. So the same way we did it initially, we're going to look at our supply line and see where that intersects with our new price up here, which is going to give us a new higher quantity supplied. Because at a higher tariff price, domestic producers are going to be more willing to supply more goods in the market. And then on the other side, we're going to look at demand and see where that intersects with our new price right here. And we see that quantity demanded has decreased due to a new higher price. So we see movements, and essentially this is going to set up new areas for us to find how we change producer and consumer surplus. So I'm going to label all of these areas. Okay, so now we've placed a tariff on this good in this market, and we now have a higher price after our tariff. We want to look at how this changes our imports. We remember initially, we have an initial quantity supplied and initial quantity demanded at our world price, and the distance between these 2 points is our amount of goods that are imported. After the tariff is implemented, our quantity supplied increases, moving along the supply line to a higher quantity, while our quantity demanded moves to the left along the demand curve, and we have a lower quantity demanded. So we now have a smaller distance between quantity supplied and quantity demanded, which means we have a lower amount of goods that are imported. And now I want to reiterate before we move forward with the tariff to remind you what our pre-tariff consumer and producer surplus is. We remember that our producer surplus is going to be this small triangle here, area C, while our consumer surplus is the entire area above the price and below the demand curve, which is A, B, E, D, G, and F. So before our tariff, our consumer surplus is area A plus B plus E plus D plus G plus F. And our producer surplus is simply area C. And now we have our tariff implemented. So essentially, this area between our world price and our price with the tariff is going to change our producer and consumer surplus. And it's also going to impact government revenue because a tariff is a tax, which means the government is earning some revenue off of the new higher price. So as we can see here, at this new price line, we want to look at the area below the price and above the supply line to find our new producer surplus. So that area above our price, or sorry, below our price and above our supply line is going to be areas C and B now. Producers are gaining due to a higher price. Because of a higher price, we now have more supply, which is gaining producer surplus. So our new producer surplus with the tariff is going to be our area C plus B. And we want to remember that these are domestic firms that are gaining. Foreign suppliers are not helped by the tariff because it's a tax on them, but domestic producers are helped by the new higher price. And now we want to look at the change in consumer surplus. We know that consumer surplus is the area above the price and below the demand curve. If we look at the differences between our initial world price and our price with the tariff, we see that consumer surplus is decreasing to this area, A and E, because a higher price is going to decrease consumer surplus. So after the tariff, our consumer surplus is area A plus E, which means we're left with three other areas that aren't going towards consumer or producer surplus. We see this area in the middle here, G, that's going to be the amount of revenue that goes towards the government, which is going to be this rectangle right here. That's government revenue. That's the revenue that's gained by the government as a result of the tariff. So we can show that over here. So this government revenue right here, we see that we're gaining government revenue is the distance between our new quantity supplied and new quantity demanded, which is the amount imported. That's our base times the height of this triangle, or sorry, this rectangle, which is the difference between the world price and the price with the tariff, which is simply the size of the tax. So essentially, government revenue is the amount imported times the size of the tax, which gives you this rectangle right here. So now we have areas D and F. This is what's called deadweight loss. It's part of the market that's lost to everybody. It's not gained by consumers, it's not gained by producers, and it's not gained by the government. It's simply lost because a tax naturally creates deadweight loss in the market. That's what areas D and F are. So those are losses. So that's an overall negative impact on the market. So now that we've shown the before tariff effects and the after tariff effects of our world price and our tariff, I'll go through and show the actual changes to producer and consumer surplus. So to show the change in consumer surplus, we're going to simply subtract our before tariff values from our after tariff values. So our after tariff values of consumer surplus is simply A plus E. And we're subtracting what we initially had, which is our consumer surplus before the tariff, which is A plus B plus E plus D plus G plus F. So because we're subtracting this, these are all going to become negative values, which means we can simply cross off what we don't have anymore. So the A's are going to cancel each other out because it's A minus A, and the E's are also going to cancel each other out. So after everything cancels, we're left simply with B plus D plus G plus F, which is signifying that our tariff essentially makes consumer surplus decrease by this amount. It's a negative amount because consumer surplus is decreasing. So now we'll do the same thing but for producer surplus. So we have C plus B from our after tariff values. And we want to subtract out our initial values before the tariff, which is simply C. So our C's cancel, and our overall change in producer surplus is a gain of area B, because producers are gaining due to a new higher price after the tariff. Also, it's worth noting that we have a positive change in government revenue. So now that we have all of the changes to our consumer surplus, producer surplus, and government revenue, we can aggregate all of these to show the net impact of the tariff on the overall market. So I'll show that over here. We have our change in consumer surplus, which is equal to our negative values, B plus D plus G plus F. We have our change in producer surplus, which is positive B, and our change in government revenue, which is positive G. If we add these all together, we see that our B's cancel because we have a positive and a negative, as well as our G's, which means we're left with an overall deadweight loss of negative D plus F. So we know this is a deadweight loss because it's not gained by anybody. It's not gained by producers when we increase the price with the tariff. It's not gained by the government, and it's not gained by by consumers. It's simply lost entirely, which is why tariffs overall are not preferred to open market free trade. That's the whole takeaway of this idea that tariffs, although they help producers, domestic producers, they don't help the overall economy. And they actually lead to a loss, a deadweight loss of D plus F. That's all we have for today. If you need any help, please come into the Economics Tutoring Center and look for more videos like this. Like coming up, we'll probably be doing a large country tariff example, which is basically building upon the basic ideas presented here with the small country example.